Okay, your exam is going to be based on all experiments that you have learned or you have performed so far. Experiment 12. What was your experiment 12? Was oxidation of the side chain alcohol, right? Oxidation of the side chain. What was the purpose of the experiment? And the pre-lab questions. Okay, everything you have on the pre-lab questions. Understanding of the experiment, the purpose for experiment. The setup for experiment, like drawing of the setup for the experiment. What was the major setup for the experiment? Okay. The calculation for the experiment. When you have a chemical reaction, you have reactants and products. You have limiting reactant, you have excess compound. So for excess compound, you don't involve that in the reaction for percent or calculation for percent yield. But limiting reactant determines how much of product you will get theoretically, and that is the theoretical yield. And the other experiment, the other calculation that you have beside the theoretical yield is percent yield. When you have your actual, divide by theoretical times 100. Okay. So your exam, you want your exam to be on 16? Okay, your exam would be on 16. I have no problem with exam on 16. I was just because that's what the schedule says, and we go with the schedule, no problem. That's good. I didn't look at the lab schedule, sorry. So the exam would be based on the schedule on the 16th. Okay. That's for experiment 12, right? So what is the chemical reaction? How do you do calculation based on the chemical reaction? Basically for percent yield and for the theoretical yield. Setup for the experiment, which was setting up a reflux, what equipments they were involved. Like if you were asked to draw the setup, or if you were asked to label. Okay, I'm going to have to think about a way that I can still give you questions. Okay, I might have to talk to the honor lock and ask them if we can have the monitoring like the drawing, so it's not like other papers on the table, or you're gonna have to do something about it. So the questions, you should be able to answer them. So if the drawing is not going to work, then it's going to be okay. Know the mechanism for reactions. For the ones that we talked about, the mechanism for reactions, or the mechanism for reaction is explained in the reaction in the lab manual. If you see the reaction mechanism, like for experiment 13, you have reactions and you have reaction mechanisms. So you need to know the mechanism, you need to know your reaction, you need to know the reaction in case if you were going to do calculation based on the yield or percent yield for this reaction. So for every experiment that you calculate percent yield, you should know the calculation, how to perform. Pre-lab questions again. This is for experiment. Now, experiment 14, pre-lab questions. For experiment 14 would be pre-lab questions, and then it's going to be the purpose for the experiment. How do you confirm you do have a product? How do you confirm your product is going to be pure? And let me check your questions to make sure. Do we have to draw the reactions ourselves? Maybe the reactions are given and then you have to write the reagent in a way that it has to be in a way that you can either write or pick the right answer. Okay, so maybe the pieces of the mechanisms is given and then you have to write the order. If you know the mechanism reaction, you should be able to answer it. So, and it's not, the questions are not coming from, outside of this lab manual. So if you paid attention when we were talking about pre-lab discussions, why we are doing this, why we are doing that, and you wrote the answers to pre-lab questions yourself. If you did, you worked hard enough to write the lab report yourself, to discuss about, to do the calculation for percent yield and all that. Now you don't even have to study, at least for these reactions. Okay? But you need to review and make sure that you understand the experiment. You know what setup you used. Did you use distillation? You used reflux? You used recrystallization? What setup you used? What is the chemical reaction? What's your limiting reactant? How do you calculate percent yield? Experiment 15. It was a reduction reaction from ketone to alcohol. You use the IR for that experiment. You use IR for esterification experiment. What's the purpose of using IR? Or how would you determine your product has formed? How would you determine your product is pure? So to identify you have a product and your product is pure. The purpose of using sodium borohydride. So those are questions that you have seen it in the pre-lab questions, or we've talked about, or you have watched me setting up and I ask you to take a screenshot of the setup. The experiment 16, synthesis of dibenzyl acetone, pre-lab questions. Mechanism for reaction, you have the steps at least. If it doesn't show the mechanism, it shows the steps of the reaction. So you have the steps for the reaction. So you can write the missing pieces. Okay. Sometimes I just ask to write missing pieces because that's more doable than drawing the actual reaction. So if I ask you to write missing pieces, that is considered for steps for the reaction. It's not all types of reaction, only the reaction that you have performed in the lab. Experiment 17, I'm not going to bring any question directly from 17 to give you graph and say what are the functional group or questions directly like your theory based, because you have that enough of it in lecture. Same thing for NMR, but application for it, like if you have a reduction of ketone to alcohol, what's going to happen? How do you know based on NMR that you had the product? So a short, broad peak between 2 and 5 is going to show you have alcohol as the product. So experiment 17, no direct questions, but application of IR NMR for the other chemical reactions. Experiment 18, I told you you will have a lot of questions, maybe 4 or 5 questions from experiment 18, from the chart that you have here, and the examples that I gave you that day when we were talking about experiment 18. For example, if you were asked to give me example of alcohol that dissolves in water, you could have more than one answer, but that would be in, or if you have 4 choices and says, okay, pick all the compounds that would dissolve in water. Or if you have other choices and it says, pick the compound that dissolves in sodium bicarbonate, or it doesn't dissolve in sodium bicarbonate. So you have to be able to recognize and know this chart in order to answer those questions. Like carboxylic acid, if it has less than 5 carbon, would dissolve in water. If it has more than 5 carbon, it doesn't dissolve in water. Make sure to watch the chapter 18 one more time. Take notes, read the procedure, so you can add that chart in page 183. There are 2 groups that we are not going to work with them, and I don't want you to worry about it. Is the group X and group Y. Okay, group X and group Y, we didn't work in the lab. I didn't emphasize on that, so you're not going to get questioned. And that's only group X and Y. So be able to calculate percent yield, be able to set up the equipment, or if the equipment, the setup picture is given, be able to label each one. How long is the test? In terms of the number of questions, you get about between 10 or to 15 questions, but questions, because they have like part A, B, and C, so between 25 to 30 questions. 25 questions. No more. 25 questions. And the solubility chart, you had some chemical reactions that how, like, what does it mean that carboxylic acid dissolves with sodium hydroxide? Basically reacts with sodium hydroxide. It doesn't dissolve. It's not just dissolving water. It reacts with sodium hydroxide, changes to sodium carboxylate, and because it's a sodium compound, it's soluble in water. If you were given 2 compounds, how would you use solubility chart to distinguish which one is it? Which solvent are you going to use to say, is it compound A or is it compound B? You had a few examples before when I was talking about chapter 18, similar to those. How much time do you have? This is going to be proctored exam, actually, and I'm going to have to write a couple of questions. Let me see if what I want to see is if your course already has the honor lock in. Did they add the honor lock or not? Because I requested. Okay, it's not. I'm glad the exam is on the 16th because I have to add the honor lock. The time is going to be, the honor lock calculator is that good? The recording, sure. The recording, okay. Sure, some of the classification tests. Well, you get only one question that is dealing with the calculator, so you don't have many questions really for the calculator. So hopefully you can just click those numbers or do mental math. But if it's again, the Honorlock has a calculator. If not, I could add a link with the calculator. I'm sure there is a link with the calculator we can add. So you can use the online calculator, like just the scientific calculator. I haven't used the calculator, so I have no idea, no comments on that. But I will check it to see what's. Do you need the power function for calculating percent recovery? Do you need it for this exam? Sometimes you use it, but I don't know if you need it. I don't think you need it for this exam because we haven't done any calculation. We haven't done any calculation that you would use the power for this. It's just multiplying and dividing and subtraction. So we don't need the complicated one for this course at least. How many of them are graded though? Did I grade for you at least? As soon as I grade them, I will open it for you. Sure. Sure. If they're all graded, I just have to open it. No problem. I will open it. Okay. Usually notebook submissions, it's the is a very short semester. So I usually collect the notebook at the end of the semester and I grade it. And but I can't grade like a 40-page notebook. So the way that it works, but it's due, like I check it beginning of each lab to make sure that you have it. So the way that we have it, it kind of works. I will grade, believe me, I am grading papers. I haven't graded more paper for other class than as I've graded for you, for your class. So I will grade them. But you don't need the grade of the notebook before your exam. You just need the grade for your pre-lab assignments before the exam, which I make sure that they are graded. When you talk about the exam, it's not, it's not the best part of the course, but it shouldn't be the worst part of the course either. At least you get to know how much you learn taking this class, and I get to know my students more to see how much they pay attention during the course. Because the questions that you have in the exam, those are the questions that you have either seen it in pre-lab or you have heard from me during the pre-lab discussions. So it goes kind of both ways. It's gonna give me an idea how much my students paid attention. It doesn't happen in your class, but I do have students in another class that they take like 20 and long breaks, which I mark them like when they, when I get like 2, but that is not gonna help when they are trying to study for the exam. And for those of you which use like a lot and maybe very high percentage of the class in Organic 2, and almost 100% of the students in Organic 2, they take Organic 2 to learn. It's different. Is that the level? It actually shows that the students' characters, it's changing from 1045 to 1046 with Organic 1 to Organic 2. So I enjoy teaching Organic 2 because the students are more interested in learning, actually. So it's a good class. So how many questions? I don't have the exam written yet. And how long is going to be enough for you to answer the questions if you have studied? But I'm going to have to request the honor log for this course to be added to this course, because I did it once and they installed for every other course. They added to my other courses, not this one. They need to add this one. Okay. Any other questions? Any concerns? Well, let me, if you don't have any other questions, let me stop the recording. It doesn't mean that I'm stopping I'm exiting, I'm just stopping the recording.